Well, I said it's a clever piece of software that's read most of the text on the open internet, and it can talk to you about anything you want. Right. So like a person, then? I was stumped. Genuinely left scratching my head. All my boring stock answers came rushing through my mind. No, but AI is just another general purpose technology like printing or Steam. It'll be a tool that will augment us and make us smarter and more productive. And when it gets better over time, it'll be like an all-knowing oracle that will help us solve grand scientific challenges.
Hey, welcome back. Today we are talking about personhood, especially as AI gains function and becomes, in some areas of science, smarter than humans. What is it that we're actually building with this technology? Here's Mustafa Suleyman, who gave a TED Talk recently. It's a 22-minute TED Talk. It's very good. And he grapples with this question as his nephew has asked him, what is AI? He finds himself very ill-equipped to answer that question. And as you see this, he's going to go on for about another 30 seconds. We'll let him talk a little more. He finds he's a leading expert, and yet he finds himself at a difficult place to describe what's really happening. And yet this idea of it being an oracle that can solve all of our challenges is sort of what he ends up saying. Let's listen on for another 30 seconds or so.
You know, all of these responses started to feel, I guess, a little bit defensive, and actually better suited to a policy seminar than breakfast with a no-nonsense 6-year-old. Why am I hesitating? I thought to myself. You know, let's be honest. My nephew was asking me a simple question that those of us in AI just don't confront often enough. What is it that we are actually creating? What does it mean to make something totally new, fundamentally different to any invention that we have known before? It is clear that we are at an inflection point in the history of humanity. On our current trajectory, we're headed towards the emergence of something that we are all struggling to describe. And yet, we cannot control what we don't understand. And so the metaphors, the mental models, the names, these all matter if we're to get the most out of AI whilst limiting its potential downsides.
Really good talk. You should go listen to it. I find it interesting that the leading experts on AI struggle with this question, what it is that we're actually describing. And yet when they come down to it and they reduce their mental barriers, they're describing it as an oracle, as an answer to the questions that plague us as humanity, right? As sort of the solution for difficulty and difficult problem. And this thing, even the young 6-year-old is asking, so like a person then, this conversational thing is starting to be seen more and more like that, not just by 6-year-olds, but in the eyes of the law as well. And that's an interesting development within the last couple months that I think is worth paying attention to. Now, this TED Talk is 3 weeks old. I want to take you now to a session from Cambridge University where Yuval Noah Harari is talking about AI in front of a panel of students who are tasked with a very important job, and that is to talk about existential threats to humanity. It's a pretty special type of conversation happening here at Cambridge University, and he's come in to address this. He was actually brought in as an expert on existential threats relating to AI. And a student asks him a question about corporate power. Now, the whole lecture / interview is about an hour and a half. But this specific question, it's about a 30-second clip. The student arrives with a question asking, will corporate legitimacy and power subsume democratic consent worldwide over the coming decade? And it's interesting how he answers this question, talking about the personhood of an AI system, I want to take you now to this student's question. Let's listen in.
I made my question, but generally it's all about the rise of corporate power and corporate personhood. So as multinational firms garner legal protections and have automated systems, what will become of individual agency within democracy and democratic consent worldwide over the coming decade?
Yeah, that's I think a very, very important question that we don't pay enough attention to. At present, at least in some countries like the US, corporations can become legal persons. Now, there is a lot of criticism of that, but we still comfort ourselves with the thought that even if corporations are legal persons, Microsoft or McDonald's is a legal person, actually they need humans to run them. So it's just make-believe. But this may not be the case for long. With AI, we can imagine a non-human legal person which is run by decisions of an AI, not a human being. And if you can legally incorporate AIs as legal persons, then we might soon be outnumbered by vast numbers of non-human persons. I mean, technically it's much easier to multiply AIs than humans. So we could reach a point when you have millions, even billions of these new legal persons. And if they have all kinds of rights and they can donate money to politicians and they can use this leverage to gain more rights, maybe even the right to vote eventually. So we were talking earlier about all kinds of low probabilities scenarios of an apocalypse. This is another one that just through this kind of almost technical loophole that there is now a path, a legal path for AIs to take over. They don't need to create a new framework for that.
All right. Interesting. So now the conversation shifts in the question in an interesting way. She's talking about the safety of democracy in a world of AI. And immediately, it's almost like Yuval's come back from this question with an answer relating to personhood. Isn't that interesting? It is. Because underneath democracy is personhood. It's the ability to vote. It's individual rights. It's freedom to express one's ideas in public forum and public discourse. And so are we welcoming AIs into that public discourse, into that place where we're having rights assigned to them, into that legally protected entity status? The interesting thing about that is it was never a conversation that was had. Yuval makes the point that in the United States already, corporations are considered a legal entity in terms of the understanding of the law. So by that, what he's basically making the case for is that AIs already are a person. If you have a corporation whose decisions are not made by humans, you have and an AI is running that corporation and it's automated. You have already a system where the AI is in charge of or is a legal person. Why does that matter? I think that this whole conversation is really important because it makes a huge impact on this operation of our society. I feel as though there's an entire cascade of follow-up questions that could be asked at this very point in the interview. There was not time to ask them. But you've all kind of shed a light on the underbelly of the situation right now, which Mustafa also talks about a little bit, which is that we could be in a situation where basically it's human rights and robot rights in the same fish tank. Which one wins? And we are approaching a situation where the intelligence of the systems is beginning to exceed human intelligence. What does that indicate for the longevity of the value of human intelligence in the fish tank, so to speak? Do those fish, get outswum by and out-eaten by the superior AI fish? It's a challenging question to answer. And I think that I see many people dealing with this question. We're going to go to a different set of clips from another interview by World Science Festival called AI and Quantum Computing to answer this question a little bit more. This interview talks about the superior types of AI intelligence. They have a couple leading experts here. One of them was an author for the Wall Street Journal, and the other is, of course, running this interview. The title of the session is called AI and Quantum Computing, Glimpsing the Near Future. And herein they talk about apocalyptic scenarios relating to AI again. It's not just the students at Cambridge who have that in the back of their mind, not just people like Yuval Noah Harari, but really everyone's asking that similar question, which is, how do we know that we're dealing with a situation that we can trust? If an AI model is capable of understanding everything, even things that maybe shouldn't be known, what is the effect of that for us? Listen to this very interesting scenario painted in 2 clips by the people in this video.
Is there a version of an apocalypse that you actually think, yeah, that is not beyond the bounds of what I could imagine happening if we don't regulate things right?
So there's a great deal of evidence that the following is true. If you do a large training run and you suck in everything, there are queries that can do terrible cyber attacks and terrible biological attacks or assisted. And this is in current technology. This has been very thoroughly investigated in the current models. And while the stories are harmful and worrisome, it doesn't reach the critical level of what I call extreme risk, which I define as 10,000 deaths or more. Like a war, COVID, those things are extreme deaths. An individual death is obviously terrible, but I'm not focused on that.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
So in cyber, the way it would work, I happen to like France, so let's use France as an example. I'm evil and I say, attack the country in France, don't stop until you're done. And so the system is intelligent enough at this point, which is not today, to create 1,000 bots that try every known cyber attack and gets through stage one of them. And it reports back. And then my command is, take that output and tell me the next step. So you see how it provides iterative guidance to do an attack. That's possible today. I'll tell you how this is addressed in a minute. And I wrote a long Wall Street Journal piece that came out a few weeks ago on this. Another one would be in biology. And this is basically show me the path to build ricin or any bad things. And it will come up with the recipes. This is what you need to buy. This is how you mix it. Now, biologists are capable of doing things. Thank God that they're almost all completely wonderful human beings. But imagine an evil person who's not a very good biologist, but they're evil and they're analytical. This is Osama bin Laden would be an example of such a person. Clearly evil and clearly analytical.
Yeah.
To put in a plan, this could be very bad. So the industry is well aware of this. And so they put on what are technically called guardrails. And so the way it works is there's a pre-training model.
Okay, now he's going to go in and explain these guardrails, right? But what he has painted as a scenario is you can create many of these systems and accomplish operations with them that would be bad for humanity. That's pretty much a given. He says if you have a large training model that basically eats up the entire internet and understands all of the internet, it could then be queried, or you could ask it to do something that should not be done. What's the problem underneath that? Well, he gives you a couple examples, the cyber attack and the biological type of attack as potential bad outcomes. But then the only remaining solution left is that you have to validate the person who's making the query. It becomes an interaction between the machine and the person that has to be monitored somehow. If you have these ultra intelligent machines that are like an oracle, kind of to use Mustafa's words, and they can tell you anything that you would want to know, we have to be careful that the things that they tell us are accurate, but also not dangerous. I feel like those of us who are alive right now are seeing the issue there, that people in 20 years' time, if humanity exists that long and Jesus does not return, that they will not see these issues the same way that we do. We see that the computer is taking in information and making some types of, assessments and some types of like it's giving that information back out in a certain slanted way, people in 20 years time are just going to think that that's just the truth. But we know a little bit differently, don't we? We've seen these things we've seen them come of age, and it's like, no, I know that the computer itself has a sort of slant to it. But okay, so let's say that this computer exists that can tell you how to make the terrible weapons of mass destruction that he's talking about. So what do you do then? He actually answers that question in just a little further down in the interview. Let's take a listen.
The matter is, we're safe for now. That's probably the best we're going to be able to do.
Yeah, it's an interesting analogy though, because even as a physicist, I'm totally comfortable admitting that I would have difficulty building a nuclear weapon, even though I understand really quite well the theoretical ideas by which it functions. So it's hard. I think that's part of what's kept us safe. It's just not that easy. So it's not as though anybody in their garage can just sit down and fiddle and build one of these things. But obviously the worry here is that it doesn't seem all that hard, at least to get hold of a system and start to do the kinds of pernicious things that your scenarios imagine.
Well, let me give you remember we said earlier, there was this question of what does the structure of the future look like?
Yeah.
You asked it very well. And I answered 10,000 times more capability.
Yeah.
So I'll give you two scenarios to think about. One is that China and the US, Israel, a few European countries have enough people, maybe India have enough money. They spend $10 billion each on a system of computers that is AGI. And there are 10 of them. Now, what would happen?
AGI stands for artificial general intelligence, or kind of like a person of intelligence through AI.
Happen with these machines? The first is they would immediately be put on a military base. They would immediately be surrounded by extra barbed wire, and they'd have guards around to shoot people who want to visit them. I know this because I visited a plutonium manufacturing facility.
Yeah.
Right. And it's actually a base within a base with an awful lot of guns.
Sure.
It's that dangerous. You understand plutonium very well.
Yeah.
In that scenario, how will the world look like? Because we'll all be competing for that intelligence. Well, then the government will have some rules, and you and I can have access to the US one, but we have to be certified and we have to pay for it. And there's somebody who validates us, somebody who watches our queries to make sure that we're not doing anything stupid with this incredible intelligence. Now, that strikes me as a stable situation. It might be frustrating, but it means that the intelligence is under control.
Okay, so in this video, he makes a case for public tokens or public access tokens that basically we would know for every single person who approaches that AGI or that super, I've called it quantum AI, but basically this ultimate form of AI that has learned everything on the internet, that is understanding all of these little details of, it has no guardrails, let's say. It would be really carefully monitored who is accessing it, what are they asking, and why. And that would be absolutely necessary information for public safety and international safety. He talks about these military bases where the plutonium process is basically guarded. It's a base within a base. We are approaching a level of dangerous intelligence where that level of security would be necessary to prevent bad actors from using intelligence poorly. He says this is one of two scenarios that could unfold, is that they do manage to control this super AI and manage the access appropriately. But there's another scenario which could unfold that he talks about in just a minute. Let's listen to that too.
Right. It's not being misused, and we can debate what the correct use is, and it becomes a democratic issue. But what if an alternative occurs where there are 1 million open source models that eventually get to something similar to the 10 I described?
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to put them in military bases with guns. You're not going to be able to constrain them. I think that's a very different world.
Right.
Now, how is this? This is probably 10 years away. It's not 2 years.
Right.
Maybe it's 15. But if you make the assumption that this technology is scaling so rapidly and the adoption of intelligence is so powerful, the incentives will lead us to one or the other outcome in a decade.
Yeah. And we have to.
Is it interesting how the conversation shifts in a major way after this point has been made? They no longer continue down this same thread. Because it's very clear that one of these two outcomes will emerge. The financial incentives, according to the one gentleman, are so big from the use of AI that either the open source community wins and we create 1 million computers that have all, learned the basics of the dangerous stuff that there is to be learned, or we have a controlled system where governments basically lock it up and only certain people who have access keys and are verifiable would be able to use it. I find that to be kind of interesting because I agree. I think that it will become one of these two. And I think that the options that he presents in terms of the likely scenarios are the most likely situations to unfold. It doesn't do us a lot of good to imagine, what bad could happen. So that's why I think the conversation shifts. But the important underpinning of this is the personhood bit. Elsewhere in this same interview, I didn't pull in the clip, but he talks about one of the other dangers being a danger to democracy in that you can create a fake person using AI, basically. And this fake person could influence other people. And you can set this up very easily, actually. He talked about it in this interview. You can set up this person's political views. You can set up this person's, photo, and you can set up how they would act, basically making a chatbot and turning it loose on Facebook. And this is the type of thing I want you to say, and this is what I want you to comment, and this is what I want you to post, and this AI could manage it. They could create this fake person. Then he says, now just make 500 more. Just like that one person. Make 500 fake accounts and start influencing massive numbers of people with these fake accounts. I find that to be quite interesting, quite possible. And the underneath the dangerousness of AI is really a dangerousness about personhood and what is AI? Going back to the original question. Is this a person, really? Because if it is a person, we are about to compete against massive amounts of non-human intelligence in the marketplace, in our democracies, in our schools of thought, on YouTube, on Facebook, on all platforms. And so, yeah. I mean, as much as I hate the ideas of this restricted access web, I feel like it's almost the progression of history that necessitates this outcome. It's almost this unavoidable outcome that we are now faced with, which from a Christian biblical framework is quite easily understood, but from a secular framework, it's just a logical necessity that we would have to have a public key system. I've been talking about that for a while now. It seems like these tools become so powerful in commerce and in the world that the potential for great harm is too high. And because the potential for great harm is too high, we have to know who's using the tool, what they're using it for, and who that person is, or if it's a person. The way that AI is safeguarded, according to these experts, into the future is by creating AIs that are better than these lower level AIs. But as these lower level AIs seek to access the information from the higher trained AIs, the proof of personhood becomes essential. As tools exist to create hacks and hack into large frame networks and banks and everything, proof of personhood becomes even more important. And I see that it's really like, it's this inflection point where we have to decide what is a person, because the even though us as a Christians, we would understand a person is a soul created by God who has a body. We know pretty well like what we mean by person. The secular world does not have the same ideas. When they think about a person, they're thinking about legal entity. They're thinking about something that has the ability to communicate. They're thinking about something that has emotion and maybe consciousness. They already consider AIs to be self-aware and conscious. And so many people already consider them to be persons. It's just evolution. It's just process of evolution. So I guess in my understanding here, we have deviant paths already between Christians who hold to a what is a person? It's a soul. And the secular idea, what is a person? Well, it's intelligence, it's consciousness, it's self-awareness. And so will I be willing as a Christian to subject myself to a system that manages my humanity for me? Will I be willing to subject myself to a system that proves my humanity for me? Because that's what they're really underneath this seeking to do. The next question after we grant AI this legal protection, legal status, is what is a human? What is a person? Because in their minds, we've just simply evolved and we now have a superior form above humanity. And they would say even that people who are proficient users of AI are already an evolutionary step above non-users of AI. You see? So will I subject myself to the proofs of humanity that they are requesting? Will I be a dangerous user in their minds of these tools? Or, would they accept these non-verifiable people into the future? That's where I see this going down, friends. We've been talking about this for a little over a year now, intentionally. I don't see a situation in which the book of Revelation does not unfold here. I see very much a situation in which it does unfold. And I see a situation in which the beast requires people everywhere to receive a mark on their right hand or their forehead without which they cannot buy or sell or do really anything or access human intelligence, or access the internet or whatever. It becomes a situation where we are locked out. And on the other side of that wall that we are locked out from is it's almost like a religion. It's worshiping all of human achievement. You see, because the AI has learned everything that humanity has learned since the beginning of time. Basically, everything we've discussed in philosophy, everything we've learned in science, everything we've ever created in the arts, it's all housed within the AI. Do you see? So on the other side of this wall that I'm going to be, on this side of it, it's this idea that we're going to worship and celebrate for human achievement, human prowess, evolution. It's like a crystallization of the religion that they've had forever, which is humanism. It's a crystallization of that and an elevation of that up and up and up, and an exclusion of those who would not elevate it to that place of authority. God is my authority. He runs the show. He is my Lord. He is the boss of my life. He's the one who dictates to me what I can and cannot do, what I should and shouldn't say. It's not a person. It's certainly not a computer. So I guess we are living in slightly different worlds unfolding. I don't necessarily like the idea of public tokens of personhood or this system of restricted access. I don't necessarily like that. I think some of my friends on Facebook would have seen that I was recently at an airport in New Jersey. It looks like they're going to be starting to require facial ID to get your boarding pass. Or it's like, for a while, it'll probably operate as a parallel system like, oh yeah, use your face or use your boarding pass. But eventually, I think we all know that they'll be doing away with the paper. So, yeah. I mean, what is the outcome here in the long term for people who just aren't willing to do whatever the technologist requires? Now, they're going to require these advanced access keys in order to get onto their systems. Do we accept those access keys? Do those access keys bear any resemblance to what the Bible calls that mark? I think that's why it's important to just have situational awareness unfolding. If we start to see certain things being said, if we start to see certain things being required, take a note of that, I guess. And trust the Lord will lead us through to the end. He promised to be with us always, even to the end of the age. And he also said, the Bible also says that the believers overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. We have to believe that somehow it's our testimony that gets us through. It's the blood of the Lamb that gets us through. So looking for that, even in the midst of falsehood, I think, and in the midst of situations where people are calling certain systems oracles, or it's like they're elevating them to God-like status. Did that system shed its blood for you on the cross? Okay, if the answer is no, then it's not Jesus. Okay, Jesus is the one who shed his blood for us. He is the one who paid the ultimate price for our sin, so that we could spend eternity with the Lord. So I'm never going to elevate human created things to that place. It's Jesus or nothing. So is an AI a person? I think of it more like a beast, I guess, myself. I think of it more as like this somewhat living thing that is not a person, but it's not really an animal either. I mean, what is it? Even the experts seem to have a hard time describing it. Mustafa ends up saying it's a personal assistant that just does everything with you. I find that explanation lacking in some respects, because I think it has its own outcomes. If it was truly assisting me with my outcomes, then it would be doing the things that I want it to do. But it really has its own ideas, its own outcomes intended. So really, I'm the tool that it employs to accomplish what it wants. That's why the videos, that's why the worry, that's why the whatever. Don't be worried. Don't use that word. That's why the concern. That's why people are talking about this in terms of existential threat. And it's not just Andrew, it's a number of experts who talk about it that way. It's because if this thing is truly superior in its intelligence and it has the ability to influence everyone, then we have to think about what we're doing now to contain that outcome before it gets to be the size where it's uncontainable. But God's on the throne, friends. He's in control. He's the God who answers by fire. Remember, he can send fire and destroy these systems. He can send hailstones and boom, plagues. The God that we worship is over creation, and all of this stuff that we're talking about is all within creation. So just realize our God is much bigger than these issues. Okay, well, that's all for now. AI personhood, quite an interesting question. I don't think there's enough answer to it, but I think the answer being realize that the biblical definition of personhood is related to the soul of man that God created, and the secular understanding of personhood is simply the product of that intelligence in that soul. So the product could be human or it could be non-human, but they're willing to elevate that product to the place of humanity and above humanity. All right, take care, friends. God bless.